Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. The O. Henry peach. It's been popular since its introduction back in 1968. It's a sweet, juicy, long-lasting, easy peach tree to grow. It's a perfect candidate for today's Fabulous Fruit Friday. Fruit tree expert Ed Livo of tomorrowsharvest.com tells us all about it. Plus, Ed has step-by-step instructions for reducing the height of an overgrown fruit tree, taking it down to a more manageable 6 or 7 feet tall. A frequent question new gardeners have: which way should I position my fruit trees or my raised beds? North to south or east to west? That's a good question. Our favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, has some ideas on that. Plus, this is the time to be thinning the fruit from your deciduous fruit trees while that fruit is still really small. The advantages of removing fruit so that there's 6 inches of space between the remaining pieces of fruit include bigger, healthier fruit and fewer broken branches this summer. It's all on episode 96 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you by Smart Pots and tomorrowsharvest.com. And we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go. It's Fabulous Fruit Friday, which means we get to talk with Ed Livo of Tomorrow's Harvest, a division of Burchell Nursery. My wife and I were talking about the peach that you're bringing up for today's edition of Fabulous Fruit Friday, and we both thought, oh yeah, that's an old-time peach. Turns out it's not that old. I'm surprised. It sure sounds like it has an old name. It's the O. Henry peach.
Well, you know what, Fred? The O. Henry peach has been around for a long time, and because it became so popular so quickly after its introduction in 1968, it really seems like it's been around for a long, long time. And maybe you both have this taste for old-fashioned peaches, because if I were to tell you anything about the flavor of an O. Henry peach, I would tell you that it has all the attributes of what we would consider a classic peach. Definitely, just rich, wonderful, smooth texture, very sweet, with just the slightest hint of acidity.
And it is a freestone peach, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's freestone. It has an interesting lineage. There was a very prolific breeder that was up in the Red Bluff area in California, probably through the early 1900s into the mid 1900s, and that was Grant Merrill. And he introduced many, many varieties of peaches and nectarines. This particular one came to Burchell Nursery through Grant Merrill, then was introduced to the market through Burchell Nursery. It became a commercial success overnight. It was probably almost in every grocery store for a while. It was in every farmer's market that existed at the time, probably more auctions at the time than farmers markets, but you found it everywhere, just because it had so many of the qualities that a really wonderful peach should have, and all the attributes that the commercial growers were looking for. Firmness, could be transported, a good long shelf life, and plus could be picked firm with great flavor. So it just really caught on with the commercial growers and the farmers market growers very quickly.
Yeah, you mentioned this Grant Merrill guy, and man, oh man, is he responsible for a lot of peaches. I counted something like 25 varieties of peaches that have his name on it, like yes. Merrill Bonanza. And I think, isn't the Merrill Bonanza part of the lineage of the O. Henry?
Correct, it is. It's one of the parents. And actually the Merrill Bonanza and a nectarine.
And the O. Henry peach, as you mentioned, was introduced, just a little over 50 years ago, and it took off. It was popular, and it's very popular in grilling as well. I think that's something that I wish more people took advantage of, is grilling fresh fruit.
Yeah, and the O. Henry definitely falls into that classification, simply because when it's nice and firm and you slice it and put it on the grill kind of takes all the moisture out of it and concentrates the sugar and the flavor. And I'm sure you've grilled peaches, right?
Oh, yeah. It's easy. It's a medium heat, 3 minutes aside, and you take it off, and it's like eating a peach pie or an apple pie.
It is. It's tremendous. I think the O. Henry is probably one of the best for doing that with as well. O. Henry is good for everything, and it has a long hang time. And so, this is a peach that'll hang on the tree and be able to be picked from firm ripe, okay, where it's nice and sweet, kind of has that little bit of a snap crunch to the fruit, to the skin, and at the same time a nice smooth texture with a great wonderful sweetness and that little bit of acidity that comes through, and that's probably a hint of that nectarine coming through. And then it just keeps getting smoother and smoother on the tree until it's just syrupy sweet and juice running down your arms, and that kind of classic peach experience that everybody just loves to have and then regrets after they're done and have to clean up.
The O. Henry peach, it's also good for canning, baking, and making preserves as well.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's good for everything that you would do with a classic peach. And so, or even a cling for that matter.
The O. Henry peach. Check it out. Go to tomorrowsharvest.com and check out the details about the O. Henry peach, today's delicious piece of fruit on Fabulous Fruit Friday. Well, we've come to that segment of the program where people are asking Ed questions. We call it Ask Ed because why not? And several people have written in with basically the same question. They love the idea of keeping fruit trees small, but unfortunately their deciduous fruit trees have been around a while, so they're 12 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet tall, and they're wondering how they can take those trees back to a more workable 6 or 7 feet tall.
It's a combination of both winter and summer pruning, and I've done this many times. First off, in the spring, you can do this and actually keep the fruit tree producing as well. The first year that you go in and prune is going to be the biggest cut. So you take back about a third of the total canopy the first spring, bring it down. Then you let it flush. And then about midsummer, you come back to where you made that cut, and you cut it off completely. Just top it. It's just going to make a big mess at the top of your tree, but don't worry about that, okay? Because it's also pushing buds lower, and it's also stimulating buds down below those cuts. Then the next fall or next winter, you'll come in and you'll cut it down another third. Again, in the spring, you'll get this flush. Okay, then you'll come back in after, say, by the late spring, and you'll cut that flush back all the way to where you cut it that winter. Okay, now your next year, you have to determine how tall do you want it, because if you cut it back a third next year, of course, you end up with a pretty dang short tree. So, by that time, if you're bringing it down roughly about a third, you're probably down right around 6-7 feet on the third season.
And I guess for most fruit trees being maybe 15, 20, 25 feet tall, if you have a pole pruner, this might be doable while you're standing on the ground.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, because you're really not trying to do this in any kind of real artistic fashion. This is actually just butcher pruning. You're cutting this thing down, trying to get it down to size without losing the ability of the tree to push new growth. So every time you prune it in the summertime and you whack back that spring flush, you're actually stimulating buds down below that cut that you made in the wintertime, so that they'll be there and they'll be the place you're cutting down to next, and they'll stimulate, and push the next spring. So that's really what you're doing, and that's why you're graduating it down like that.
And then it just comes to the point where, okay, how much do you want to leave? And as you like to say, Ed, just keep it as tall as you can reach.
Yeah, it's tall. I tend to have my trees. All my trees are as tall as I stand with my hands extended above my head.
Yep, because anything above that, if you can't stand on the ground and pick the fruit, everything else is for the birds.
Right. And I think that, there'll be a group, there'll be a whole bunch of people that'll say, but wait a minute, I have deer problems. Well, I've actually looked at caging fruit trees years ago, we did a lot of experiments with actually just caging fruit trees, keeping them nice and low, and then, say to 6 foot, then creating a circular cage around your fruit tree, and then just allowing the deer to come up and eat the outsides, anything that grows outside the cage. They actually develop and promote the fruiting wood inside your pen, and you can make the circle as wide as you want around your fruit tree. So that was a simple way of keeping deer out, keeping the trees low, but at the same time having the deer come in and work for you by nibbling the sides and keeping the tree in check. And then you just leave one end open so that we're not one end open, but I would use baling wire and just bale wire one where the two ends come together. And then whenever I wanted to get into the tree, just take the baling wire back, get inside, do my work, do my picking, whatever, then bale wire it back.
There you go. Deer-proof your fruit trees the easy way and still have plenty of fruit for yourself. Yeah.
And have a reasonable sized tree as well.
Exactly. So in total, it would take probably 2 to 3 seasons to take a overgrown fruit tree down to we'll call it backyard orchard culture size.
Yeah, but it's two seasons, and the third season you decide what height you're going to maintain it at, and now you start to get particular about what limbs you're leaving, and you start to look at, you might take a pruning class at that point because now your tree's down to a really reasonable size, and you would get what I always call crow's feet at the top of every one of these cuts where you have a number of different branches all breaking at one time in one space. Now, that third season, you're going to want to come in and look at which of these groups of branches do you want to keep and promote, and then maintain those and keep those in check and eliminate everything else. And then you go into opening the center of your tree at that time and making sure you got plenty of light and air movement going through your tree, and watching where your fruit set is so that you're promoting your fruit set down lower in your canopy as well.
So that would be your thinning cuts then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your thinning cuts, right. Yeah, heading cuts are what you're using during the development period, with the reconstruction period. Yeah, we done that a number of times. I say a number of times, a lot of times, because typically that would be the big problem. Oh my gosh, I just listened to your lecture and my trees are 12 to 15 feet tall, and what do I do? The first house I moved into in Modesto had an apricot tree that separated my neighbor and I, and the apricot tree was roughly about 12 feet tall. And it was a wonderful apricot tree, but it hung way over into my yard. And my neighbor came over and said, he's one of my closest friends now. He came over and said, listen, I understand the tree. I'm going to cut it down. I said, like ducks you are. I said, we're going to just bring the tree down. And we had.
Now, but when you said that, you meant to bring the tree down in size.
Yeah, we're going to bring the tree down. I said, we're going to bring the tree down so that I can enjoy this side of the tree and you can enjoy your side like you always have. And it took me 2 seasons, and I brought the whole apricot down. We had 8-foot fences separating our yards in Modesto. So the tree's canopy actually came right over the top of the fence. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful tree, and it produced all kinds of great fruit, and we maintained it there for all I know, it's still there.
There you go. You and your saw.
Yeah. I like to prune.
But I think for most people, especially if they're not adept at especially pruning trees, is to keep your feet firmly on the ground.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mean it when you start getting up in the ladders and stuff like that. I mean, that becomes dangerous. And
yes.
And on top of that, I mean, do you need it that tall? I mean, there is some people who would need it that tall. They would say, I'm canning and I have to can, hundreds of bottles of, peaches a year. And so I really am looking for the biggest tree possible. Well, that's fine. But most people barely, off of a typical peach tree, could barely eat 20 to 50 pieces of fruit off of the entire tree in an average season. So, why have a tree that produces 500?
Yeah. And by having a smaller tree, that means you have room for more trees of the same height.
Yeah, that. And probably the most important thing going into these drier periods that we're, of course, experiencing, keep in mind that when you're keeping these trees shorter, they're using less water.
Good point. And mulching too.
Mulching's tremendously important. That's should be a mandate in California home gardening.
On Fabulous Fruit Friday, we've heard about the O. Henry peach and good advice from Ed Livo as well about bringing down an overgrown fruit tree to a more manageable height, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. And yes, you can do it. Ed Livo, tomorrowsharvest.com is the website, a division of Burchell Nurseries. Ed, thanks for another Fabulous Fruit Friday.
My pleasure, Fred, and we'll come up with something interesting for our next visit.
Smart Pots are the original award-winning fabric planter. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% in the USA. Smart Pots are also BPA-free. There's no risk of chemicals leaching into the soil, your herbs, vegetables, and other edibles. That's why organic growers prefer Smart Pots. Smart Pots' breathable fabric creates a healthy root structure for plants. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes, and they can be reused year after year. If a frost or freeze is in the forecast, moving your frost-tender plants that are in the Smart Pots that have handles makes them even easier to move closer to the house for added warmth, or you could even move them inside. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight fabric containers. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred for more info and that special Farmer Fred discount on your next Smart Pot purchase. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. We like to bring in our favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, to help us out on these. You can get questions to us in a myriad of ways. Maybe you want to hear your voice. Well, you could give us a call at 916-292-8964. That's 916-292-8964. You could text your message and picture that way as well. Email, sure, send it to Fred at farmerfred.com. So, Debbie, let's tackle this email question from Richard in Southwest Utah, Zone 8A, he points out, who says, I'm going to plant some stone fruit trees in my garden this week, doubling them up as has been suggested on your show, and keep them pruned to less than 7 feet tall. Our summers here in Southwest Utah are similar to Las Vegas, but about 5 degrees cooler. The trees will have full sun all day long. The question is, should I plant the trees north-south or east-west, or does it really not make a difference?
The shorter you want to keep them, the more work you're going to have to do in pruning. Just keep that in mind. It's not going to just happen on its own.
But at least you won't be on a ladder. So there's that.
Right. Right. No, that's very true. It's just something that you have to keep in mind. There is continuous maintenance to be done.
Yeah, but actually, it's not all that much work. If you don't let your trees get any taller than you can reach from the ground, then you can just head them back. And truly, I know you're not going to agree with this, but head it back when you're thinning the fruit, and then again later in the summer when you're harvesting the fruit, and just prune it back, those branches, and you could, I guess, prune it back to a crossing branch to no more than you can extend with a pair of shears in your hand.
Right. No, I agree with that.
Okay.
The heading back has been very hard for me to do because I have so much training in thinning pruning. So I've had to adjust, and it has been very hard for me. But I'm getting there.
Okay. All right. Thinning is where you're taking a branch back to a crossing branch, an intersection with another branch. And heading just means chopping it, basically.
Right. At a random location. And so you just stand there, as you say, with the pruning shears in your hand and whatever you can reach. And I actually go a little bit lower than that because I know it's going to grow from that point, and cut it off.
There you go. All right. So anyway, we solved that issue, but we have the fact that Richard in Southwest Utah, where it's only 5 degrees cooler than Las Vegas, which gets to 120 degrees in the summertime. I'm wondering, and those trees are going to have full sun all day long. Is there really a concern about north, south, or east or west?
Yes, there could be. The times I've approached this subject is when we talk about orienting a greenhouse, and the scientific studies that have looked at this. So you want the goal being to orient it so that you get enough sun or the most sun year round. And the studies that have looked at this say that the greenhouse should be oriented east to west. And it's because there will be some shade from plant to plant in the summer when it's very hot, Las Vegas gets very hot, so does southwest Utah. But in winter, when the sun is in the southern hemisphere much more than it is overhead, then all the plants will get some sun in winter. However, with a growing row of trees, that east to west orientation is going to result in a lot more growth on the first plant at either end, on the east end and on the west end. So that maintenance will be required. If you let that plant grow much bigger than the others, then your summer production will be decline on the plants in the middle.
Because the sun is in the south.
Well, in the summer, the sun is overhead more.
Yeah.
And so the eastern plant gets more sun, then it's overhead, everybody gets sun, then the sun goes to set, and the western plant gets more sun. So
For those
two plants may grow more vigorously. So you might want to put your more dwarf plants on either end like that.
For those of you listening in Australia, never mind.
Yes, really. This is north of the equator.
Yes. All right. So then you are espousing situating fruit trees to run north-south.
No, actually, I know I said that before, but I just did a little research and thought about the greenhouses at ARC.
American River College. Yes.
Right, which we figured out were oriented correctly, except for one of them. So east-west is actually the scientifically recommended direction for a greenhouse. And I'm translating that to plants. And I have experience. I've experienced growing a cherry tree that was grafted to 3 different cultivars. And the east and west side grew the most. And the one that was on the south actually really was struggling. I had to pay a lot of attention to pruning the cultivars on the east and west side of this single tree so that the one on the south got enough sun, which doesn't seem logical, but that's how it worked. And with greenhouses, it at almost all latitudes, east-west is the recommended orientation so that all the plants get, or that the greenhouse gets enough sun in the winter. If these are deciduous trees, that may not be critical.
Okay, so basically orient your fruit trees to, in all considerations, so that they're not casting shade onto the rest of your garden.
Right. I think ultimately it doesn't matter. He should orient them the way that's going to work best in his landscape, that he can get to them for pruning, that the irrigation works. You know, there are all kinds of fences and houses and other plants in the garden to consider. And I think I would use that input to come up with the best that works for his landscape.
Oh, okay, we made it easy. My concern then is keeping fruit trees alive in a climate where summertime temperatures will easily get to 110. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, you better use a lot of mulch.
Right, irrigation and mulch, yes. And sometimes afternoon shade, depending on what plant you're looking at. Sometimes afternoon shade can be beneficial for fruit trees or for a vegetable garden if you're in a really hot location.
Good luck, Richard. Orient those fruit trees whichever suits your fancy or that your wife approves of. Your choice. Yes. All right. Debbie Flower, once again, thank you for helping us answer some garden questions.
Always fun to do it. Thank you.
Warmer weather means that fruit trees and berry bushes will soon spring to life with the promise of tasty, nutritious, fresh fruit for you and your family. So what are you waiting for? A website with more information? Okay, you've got it. It's tomorrowsharvest.com, your go-to site for a complete line of backyard fruit trees and bushes. Tomorrow's Harvest fine line of fruit trees is the result of 75 years of developing, testing, and growing. 3 generations of the Burchell family have been at the forefront of research and development of plants of the highest quality, and all of these beautiful edible plants have been carefully cultivated for your home garden. Look for Tomorrow's Harvest fruit trees at better retail nurseries. And if your favorite nursery doesn't carry any of Tomorrow's Harvest fruit, nut, and berry varieties, you can order them directly from tomorrowsharvest.com. And when you order them online, they come in plantable paper pots ready for you to stick directly in the ground, pot and all. Let the Burchell family's 3 generations of experience take root in your home orchard, landscape, and garden. Tomorrow's Harvest. It's goodness you can grow. If you want to find out more about their nutritious and delicious fruit and nut varieties, visit tomorrowsharvest.com. Late April and early May is a good time for planting many easy-to-grow vegetables from seed. That includes carrots, corn, cucumbers, eggplants, radishes, summer squash, and winter squash. Now, of course, it all depends where you live. If you live in a colder climate, it might be closer to Mother's Day or even the 1st of June that you might be doing this. Well, after everybody gets their seeds in, there's a problem. Because the emerging plants are small, many gardeners don't have the heart to thin them out to their proper spacing. The result? An undersized crop, greater incidence of pests and diseases, or too much of a good thing. For instance, squash, like zucchini. That's a perfect example. Now, if you've planted zucchini before, you know what I'm talking about. But how many of you have actually read the instructions on a seed package on how to plant zucchini? Well, here's the instructions found on a Burpee seed packet. It says, sow 1 to 2 seeds of zucchini about 36 inches apart. Cover with 1 inch of fine soil. Firm lightly and keep evenly moist. Zucchini seedlings emerge in 10 to 14 days. Thin to 1 plant when seedlings have 2 sets of leaves. Well, I'm here to tell you that even hardened backyard farmers like myself tend to ignore those spacing instructions, let alone just keeping 1 zucchini plant. But every year it happens. Overwhelmed gardeners go on midnight runs during August, surreptitiously placing bags of oversized zucchini on neighbors' front porches. The bottom line, basically, is read and follow all planting instructions. They aren't kidding. Thinning also applies to your backyard deciduous fruit trees. If you live in a climate that allows you to grow apples, peaches, nectarines, plums, apricots, plum apricots, sometimes called pluots, and a lot more, well, they need a bit of tough love this month as well, and that's thinning the fruit. Now, it might break your heart to remove most of those future edibles in April or May. However, leaving 6 inches or more of space between each piece of fruit now will result in larger fruit and less stress on your trees this summer. You won't have to worry about broken branches that are going to start sagging and probably breaking as the overcrowded fruit gets heavier and heavier. Moreover, because of the lack of crowded and rubbing fruit, the remaining fruit is going to have better exposure and will ripen more evenly. The good news is there's plenty of food-producing backyard vines, shrubs, and trees that don't require crop thinning. Because of their small size, for example, cherries aren't usually thinned from backyard trees. Other small fruited plants like blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, they don't require fruit thinning. However, they may need their older wood or runners removed annually after harvest. If you live in a climate that allows you to grow nut crops like almonds and walnuts, they don't need thinning. And if you live where you can grow citrus trees, oranges, lemons, mandarins, limes, and other fruit-bearing evergreen trees, they don't usually require much fruit thinning either. And one more final tip, if you want to suppress weeds, moderate soil temperature, preserve soil moisture, add several inches of an organic mulch beneath all your fruit trees to conserve precious soil moisture. And what's nice, too, as that mulch breaks down, it feeds the soil. But don't let that mulch touch up against the trunk of the tree. You can spread it throughout the entire understory of the tree, but keep it about 2 to 3 inches away from the trunk to avoid rotting issues. Garden Basics comes out every Tuesday and Friday and is brought to you by Smart Pots. It's available just about anywhere, and that includes Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts. And for Northern California gardeners, it's the Green Acres Garden Podcast with Farmer Fred. It's available also wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and leaving comments. And thanks for listening.